We're looking at Philippians as a book together. We started last Sunday, so we're still in chapter 1. I don't know if you got, I tried to put on Facebook yesterday that we're doing a Bible reading, and you probably got a new Bible reading bookmark in your bulletin this morning for the month of August coming up. And we try to let you know beforehand what we're going to be preaching on so that you can read the passage that we're going to be talking about on Sunday. And Philippians 2 was for yesterday, but we're still in Philippians 1, and then next Sunday and the Sunday after, we'll be doing Philippians 2 for the next 2 weeks. So just so you can be with us on the Bible reading. Sometimes as a pastor, or as a preacher, I guess, when you come to Scripture, you come knowing that I need a sermon. And so it's easy just to kind of look at it as like a sermon book instead of a letter or a Bible. And it's good to remind ourselves of what it is that we're reading. So specifically for this book, Philippians, this is a letter that Paul has written to his friends. So let's jump right into the notes here. We must not forget that Philippians is a letter in which Paul is telling his dear friends. I'm going to stop there. You can go ahead and fill out the rest, but I want to develop the thought a little bit. Think about somebody that you're very close to. Maybe somebody in ministry. If you have maybe a family member or a close family friend who is a pastor or a missionary or something like that in ministry. Paul was a close friend. We talked about last Sunday. This is probably one of Paul's warmest letters. This is probably one of the letters where you see the nicest Paul you're going to see, the kindest, most endearing Paul that you're going to see in the book of Philippians. He's writing to good friends. And he's writing to them because he's in jail. And they know that he's in jail. And they were so concerned that they sent someone to the jail. Did you know back in the day, the jails didn't provide you with meals? It was your family's job. And so when somebody went into jail, it wasn't just them that was punished. It was the whole family, because now you had to provide for somebody who couldn't provide for you anymore. You had to get them food. You had to take care of them and take them stuff while they were imprisoned. So the church at Philippi sent Epaphroditus as well as with stuff to take care of Paul and to provide for him. And they sent him that stuff because they were concerned. There was several things going on in Paul's life. First of all, he was imprisoned. This is the person who started the church at Philippi. This is their spiritual father, so to speak. This is the one who who passed down the faith that they have. And now he's in jail. Just think about that for a second. We're so used to Paul being in jail. It's like a given. Oh yeah, Paul was in jail. He wrote this letter from jail. He wrote that letter from jail. That's a big deal for someone who is supposed to be the head of, not the head, but the spokesperson of the church is imprisoned. And so now your faith is kind of shaken, like, well, why is that happening to Paul? And could that happen to me? Where's this great God that we're supposed to be serving, that's supposed to be taking care of us, who's the Lord Sabaoth that we're not supposed to fear because God is beside us? Why is the lead spokesman for that God imprisoned? And then there's other interpersonal political things that we're going to get to in just a second that are going on of people trying to take advantage of, like, you know how there's people who are power hungry? And so if the leader is taken out of the way, then it's called like a leadership vacuum. And all of a sudden everybody's like, you know what? I could fill the spot of leader. I could be the next Paul. So what we see is, excuse me, as Paul's imprisoned, now there's all these other people kind of vying and trying to take his place and to say, okay, I'm the next apostle. I'm now the leader of the church. Paul's out of the way. I'm the next one. And so Paul talks about that a little bit. And then there's the whole issue that while he's in jail, the end of this jail sentence could be released, or it could be what? It could be death. That's what Paul's talking about. That's the situation. That's what hangs in the balance. Either he'll be acquitted and let go, or he could very easily be found guilty and killed. So this is not like you didn't pay your fine, so you're going to spend 20 days in prison. He is in prison with his life hanging in the balance. The Philippians are not only concerned about their friend. Like I said, try to put yourself, a friend of yours who has been imprisoned for the ministry, who other people are now trying to kind of shove out of the way and take his spot or their spot in leadership. and could possibly end in death. So the Philippians are not only concerned about their friend, but they're also concerned about the faith. What does this mean for the message that we've gone all in and we're following and going along with? Is this where our lives are headed? Is this movement going to last? And then there's the question of what's Paul's mentality? How is Paul holding up in prison? How is Paul doing? Trials do different things to different people. And a lot of times they can either break you or form you and shape you. They can either make you stronger or they can crush you. And so as Paul's in prison and they send Epaphroditus to encourage him, take care of our friend Paul, build him up, make sure he doesn't crush under the weight of this trial. They're waiting to hear back, how is our friend Paul doing? How is he holding up in prison? And with that kind of a context, let's go to verse 12, chapter 1, verse 12. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. But the former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance, as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me, yet which I shall choose I cannot tell. I am hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. We just stop there for a second. I'm confident this is not Paul's constant mindset, but as he's sitting down and by the inspiration of the Holy Spirit writing this letter to the Philippians, he gives us the biblical mindset about death. It has become more and more a passion of my heart that we as Christians talk differently about death, that we as Christians think differently about death. So many people, because of this closed box material mindset, begin to think that death is the end and that there's nothing worse than death and anything should be done to avoid death. And that is so counter-biblical. Death is the beginning of eternal life with God. Death is the doorway into our home in heaven. And so Paul says, my desire, if you just ask me what I want to die and go be with God. And so few Christians have that viewpoint anymore. Most Christians, including me, 6 days out of the week, you ask me and I say, I want to live. I want to have my stuff, and I want to have my house, and I want to have my family, and I want to have I've got this vacation planned, and I've got this planned. And Paul is saying, if you just ask me, and again, this is by inspiration of the Holy Spirit. I'm confident Paul was like us many days of the week. But under inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he says, my desire, my wish is to go home. I want to depart. I want to depart. We have so few Christians who want to depart anymore. We all want to stay. We want to stay here on this earth because we don't have that vision of eternity with God. That suffering sometimes grows and develops. It loosens our grip on this world. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. Life with Christ is far better than life on earth. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Because I'm convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy in the faith, so that in me you may have ample cause to glory in Christ Jesus because of my coming to you again. We'll stop there at 26. So let me, in the notes, we must not forget that Philippians is a letter which Paul is telling his dear friends that despite several trials, he is full of joy. What an incredible letter this would be to get back. As you're concerned about your friend Paul, how's he holding up in prison? How's he doing? And he writes back and says, I am rejoicing. I am full of joy. And everything that's happening to me, this imprisonment is actually God's using it for good. And these people who are trying to push me out of the way and trying to take positions and doing things through selfish ambition, I don't care. They don't bother me. They're preaching Christ. So even though their hearts are in the wrong place, God will judge their hearts. All I care, Christ is being preached. So don't worry about me about in prison. God's blessing that. Don't worry about me because other people are trying to push me out of the way. Christ is being preached. I'm rejoicing in prison. I'm rejoicing that Christ is being preached. And yeah, I know you're worried that I might die. Let me actually tell you a little secret. I would kind of like to die. I would be happy to die and go be with Christ. Don't worry about me dying. My desire is to depart and be with Christ. That is far better than being here on earth. So the worst that my prison keepers can do is send me to be with my God. That's not all that bad. You see how he totally reshapes the conversation. Do you know people like this? It is such a joy to have people like this in our lives. There are people that, it's raining outside and they step in a puddle and their car doesn't start and you're like, oh, I'm sorry you're having such a bad day. A bad day? This rain is beautiful. I mean, the earth needs all of this rain and my foot was kind of dry and stuffy. I really needed a refreshing washing of my foot. I'm so glad that happened to me. And my car won't start. That's great. I get to stay home today. They always find the positive to focus on. Do you know people that are not like that? It could be sunny outside, their car starts perfectly, they've got a beautiful walk to their car, and yet they will find things to be upset about, they will find things to complain about, they will find things to chew on your ear about how terrible life is. And you want to just slap them. Like, seriously, enjoy life for once. Just stop complaining and enjoy all the things around you. So just on a surface, this is not the full message, but this is a message that Paul is getting to us. You don't choose what happens to you, but you do choose how you will respond to what happens to you. I was going to put, instead of don't and do, I was going to put can't and can and tell you can choose to respond what will happen to you, but I don't think that's strong enough. It's not just that you can choose to respond. You do choose to respond. You may choose without thinking about it, or you may choose with thinking about it, but everything that happens to you, you make a choice. How am I going to respond to this? What is going to be my response? To a string breaking while I'm playing, or to the computer freezing up and dying 13 times as I'm trying to get it started. How am I going to respond? What is my attitude going to be about it? You decide. People cannot decide that for you. People can do things to you, but they cannot decide for you how you respond to what they do to you. You've got to see that here in Paul. He is in prison with people he says, they are trying to afflict me while I'm in prison. So, kick you while you're down is basically what he's saying. They see that I'm in prison, and they think by trying to step up, they can add more pain to my time in prison. So his circumstances are painful. The people and relationships around him are painful, and he's got death hanging in the balance. And in all of that, what is his response? What's the tone of this letter? Rejoicing. You see in verse 18, what then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice. With circumstances against him, with people against him, with security and safety against him, his response is joy, and his response is rejoicing. So what's against you today? You know, you look back on last week and you think about the bad days that you had. It takes so little for us to classify a day as a bad day, and if we have a bad day, then we're allowed to have a bad attitude. We write ourselves an excuse, well, I had a bad day. That's why I'm yelling. That's why I'm short. That's why I'm grumpy. That's why I'm kicking. That's why I'm... Paul was in prison with people purposefully trying to make his life worse, and his life hung in the balance, and he said, in this I rejoice. I am rejoicing today in my life. And all it takes for us is one little thing not to go the way we ideally thought it would go or wanted it to go, and we write ourselves an excuse, it's a bad day. Now I'm allowed to have a bad attitude. You're not allowed to have a bad attitude just because you have a bad day. You choose how you respond to what happens to you. You decide. The people in your office, they do not decide whether or not you have a bad day. You decide. The circumstances that the army puts into your life, it does not decide whether or not you have a bad attitude or a bad day. You make that decision. And some of us are in such a habit of deciding day after day after day that we're going to have a bad day and have a bad attitude, that it becomes the pattern and the habit of our lives. And let me just tell you, the people around you want to slap you because you're hard to live with. And then there are those delightful people that all of us want to be around, that choose to rejoice, that choose to see what God is doing. His wording reminds us of Joseph. Remember Joseph in prison with his brothers? He says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Look at the very first line, verse 12. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me, the evil that has happened to me, has really served to advance the gospel. That God has meant it for good. Even this bad thing of me being in prison, God's doing good things here. Look for what God is doing in your bad days, in your hard circumstances, in your trials, in those relationships that are thorns in your side. Look for God's hand. Look for God's work. God can work through bad days and bad people as easily as he can work in good. So the very surface application, the one I feel I could preach if I went to, what's his name in Texas? Joel Osteen's church. He would get on board with me here. Is that you've got to focus on the positive. You've got to find the positive. So what do you focus on? Paul responded with rejoicing because he focused on the positives. He focused on what is God doing? How is he working? It's just a simple choice. Paul could either focus on I'm in prison, or Paul could focus on even in prison, God is still advancing the gospel. And he chose to focus on the positive. He could either focus on these people are trying to take my place, these people are trying to afflict me, or he could focus on, even with bad motives, Christ is being proclaimed. He focused on the positive. He could either focus on my life could end, I could die, this is so terrible, or he could focus on, you know what, if my life ends, I go to be with God in heaven. That's not so bad. He focused on the positive. What do you focus on? What is your habit? What is your practice to focus on? There's a surface application that even if you're not a Christian, that works. You need to hear that. That's a life practice that you can put into practice today, focusing on the positive instead of the negative in a situation. But theologically, there's so much more meat here. Paul gives us a viewpoint on life that instructs us and tells us how to set our priorities. We talked about last week that we're going to look at this book through the prism of living lives worthy of the gospel. What does it mean to live life worthy of the gospel? And in this section, Paul tells us what our priorities should look like if we live life worthy of the gospel. What should be important to us? What should not be important to us? How does living life worthy of the gospel change our priorities? First of all, we don't prioritize our own comfort, popularity, or safety. That no longer becomes number one priority. I can't remember the psychologist, the order of needs. What am I talking about? Hierarchy, that's the thing, yeah. So Maslow says there's a hierarchy that everybody, by our nature, we prioritize things. And we say this is most important. Food and safety and shelter. I will bite, cheat, and steal when I'm driven to in order to make those things happen, because that's very top on my priority. I have to have that to survive and live. And living and surviving is a priority. And living life worthy of the gospel, Paul's beginning to change that. And the question is, can you really change that? Can you really defy that hierarchy of needs and that hierarchy of priorities and say, I'm not going to live for my own survival anymore. I'm not going to just make it about making sure I have food and shelter that I'm taken care of. Can you deny your inborn desire for comfort and safety and security? And there are thousands upon thousands of martyrs, thousands upon thousands of monastic Christians who have shown us, yes, you can turn your back on your own comfort and safety and security and live for something else. Instead, we prioritize Jesus. If you don't hear anything else, please hear that. A life lived worthy of the gospel must prioritize Jesus. That's the center, the epicenter of a life lived worthy of the gospel. It begins with Jesus Christ. It's focused on Jesus Christ. It's centered around Jesus Christ. That's what it means. That's what it looks like. That defines a life lived worthy of the gospel. And it probably couldn't be said any clearer than 121. When I say Philippians 121, red lights ought to trigger in your mind. If you don't have it memorized already, this week you need to memorize Philippians 121. For to me, to live is what? Christ. To live is Christ. It's so simple. It's so beautiful. Paul says, my life, a life lived worthy of the gospel that has saved me, is Jesus Christ. It is the core center of who I am, what I live for, what priorities I have. One word, very simple, Jesus. It begins with Jesus. It's centered around Jesus. So, when he's in prison, he says, I can rejoice in prison because Christ is being proclaimed. And as long as Christ is proclaimed, that's my priority. That's what I'm living for. That's what I'm working for. I don't care if people are doing it sincerely or insincerely. My main priority is that he's proclaimed. And if he's being proclaimed, then I rejoice in that. And then these words that are inspiring and beautiful and yet probably beyond my reach to legitimately share with Paul. He says, verse 18, I will rejoice at the end, and this is, for I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance. If I'm in prison and I'm writing you and saying this is going to turn out for my deliverance, let me tell you how to interpret it. I'm saying I'm going to get out of prison. When I'm in prison and talking about deliverance, I'm thinking deliverance equals get out of prison. You read Paul and he says this will turn out for my deliverance. You interpret it that way and you're missing the fullness of what he's saying. When he says, I will be delivered, if you read it to say, oh, you're sure that you're going to get out of prison, look how he defines it. I will be delivered, as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by death or by life. So when Paul says, I know I'm going to be delivered, what he's saying is, whether I get out of prison or whether I'm killed, I'm going to be delivered. I'm confident in that. Deliverance could be death or it could be life, but either one, I know deliverance is coming, and when it comes, I want Christ to be honored. You see that he's taking this hierarchy of needs and this hierarchy of priorities, and he's turning it around, and he's saying, Jesus Christ is my epicenter. Jesus Christ is my focus. If he is proclaimed and he is honored, I don't care what happens to me. If I'm released from prison, I'll keep working for Jesus Christ because he is my life. If I'm killed in prison, then Christ will be honored, and that's fine too. But my life is going to be about Jesus Christ. That is not true of me. I am not standing up here telling you this is the way I think and this is the way I live. I live with Duane Beach at the center of my life more often than not. For me to live is Duane, is usually the way my day goes. So for a Christian to write this letter and to set this bar and to say, this is what it means, this is what it looks like, to live life worthy of the gospel. For me to live is Christ. And if I live, great, I'll keep serving Christ. And if I die, great, Christ will be honored in my life, in my body, whether by life or by death. For me to live is Christ proclaimed and Christ honored. That's what my life is about. That sets a goal for us as a church that begins to make my Christian life of I'll pick and choose when I throw God a bone, disgusting. It makes me ashamed to say, this is what I'm offering God. This is what my Christian life looks like. That some days I do some nice things and I say, God, aren't you happy with that? The rest of the days I'm going to live for myself. God, just bother someone else. Tomorrow I'll get around to throwing you another bone. And Paul says the life lived worthy of the gospel is Christ. It is Christ honored and it is Christ proclaimed. It is about Jesus Christ. Oh, that we as a church would catch a vision of that kind of a life. Can you imagine if just this group right here, just us, said we're going to live for Jesus Christ. Full stop, period. And whether we die or whether we live, Christ is going to be proclaimed and Christ is going to be honored. It's hard to imagine what God could do just through this little church, this little gathering of Christians in Vilseck, Germany. So the priorities begin with Jesus, and then we also prioritize others. Notice how he kind of sandwiches it. In verse 12, he says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. So he's talking about the gospel being advanced. And then you go to the end of this section in verse 25. He says, convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with all for your progress and joy in the faith, which is that same word, the advancement. So I want to live my life to advance the gospel, and then at the very end, I want to live my life to advance your faith and your joy. And Paul has talked about this several times in his different epistles. At one point he says, I'm living my life as a drink offering. And they'd get the altar really hot. And then they'd take a liquid and they would pour a liquid onto this burning hot altar. And what happens to liquid when it's poured onto burning hot altar? Metal? It evaporates into a cloud of smoke. And then Paul took that imagery of this liquid being poured out and evaporating into smoke on this hot altar. And he said, my life is being poured out as a drink offering. My life is being poured out and evaporating in service to you and in service to God. So Jesus is life, but when Jesus is life, then others become a priority, and serving others and helping others and making sure that their faith and their joy advances becomes a priority. So others become a priority, the gospel advanced and the faith advanced. We want to see people hear the good news that Jesus Christ has come to save them from their sins. And you notice he says, I'm in prison, but actually prison has worked out really well because I've got to talk to people I've never talked to before. All these guards in prison know about Jesus Christ now. The gospel is advanced. I've been able to serve these people in prison. And he says, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get out of here alive or get out of here dead. I know I'm going to get out of here, but I think I'm going to get out of here alive because I think God still wants me to serve you as well. I think I still have more work to do for Jesus Christ. And I will continue to pour my life out like a drink offering for you, for the advancement. So the gospel is advanced, and now I want to see your faith and your joy advanced. I want to see you understand what it means to rejoice. So if Jesus becomes a priority and others become a priority, if you're a thinking, breathing American, what ought to be kind of welling up inside of you is, what about me? When do I become a priority? Who's going to look out for me? Who's going to take care of me? Who's going to provide for my needs? Who's going to make me happy? I don't know if that crossed your mind, but it crossed my mind a few times. If I live for Jesus Christ, who makes sure I get good food? If I live for Jesus Christ, then isn't my life just constantly serving other people? Constantly helping them be happy, helping their faith advance. But what about me? What about my faith? What about my joy? And there's a paradox in Christianity that I'm still wrestling with, that I think is central to who Jesus is and to the message of Jesus. This past week we were reading through the Luke 17, 18, 19 in our Bible reading as a church. And in Luke 17 and 18, over and over I started to read these phrases that caught my attention. Luke 17, 32 and 33, it says, remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will, what? Lose it. If you seek to preserve your life, you will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. And you can just kind of read past that and be like, Jesus, that's weird stuff. All right, thanks. So if I lose my life, I find it. If I find my life, I lose it. But this is not just a passing kind of weird, like Jesus is trying to be real cool and say things that his disciples don't understand. This is central to kind of what Jesus is teaching people. That there's a turnaround, there's a shift in priorities. That if you want to follow me, if you want to find life, you've got to lose it first. And then he goes on in chapter 18, he talks about the Pharisee, which is the most spiritual person they know, most committed spiritual person they know, and a tax collector who's the most wicked person, most hated person they could think of. And he says they both come to God, they both pray, and the tax collector goes away justified rather than the religious Pharisee. And then he says, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be what? Exalted. This is what Jesus teaches. You want to lose your life, you want to find your life, you have to lose it first. If you want to be exalted, you have to be humbled first. 3 verses later, he says, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter into it. If you want to come into the kingdom of God, you don't come in with your adult faith and mentality, you have to come in like a child. 12 verses later, there is no one who has left house or wife or brothers or parents or children for the sake of the kingdom of God who will not receive many times more in this time and in the age to come eternal life. There's something central to Jesus' teaching that for us today, I've labeled the paradox of the resurrection. A paradox, kids, it's two things that shouldn't go together. But even though they shouldn't go together, they do go together. And the paradox of the resurrection is that in order to experience the resurrection, what had to happen to Jesus Christ first? He was crucified. You cannot experience the power of the resurrection without the suffering of crucifixion. You can't just be living and saying, God, I want to experience the resurrection. I want to know that power. And we're going to get to this in Philippians 3. If you ask God to experience the power of the resurrection, what are you asking for? Yes, death. You have to die. You have to be crucified. It doesn't come while you're living. The resurrection does not come to living people. So even in this picture of Christ crucified for us and raised again, there's again this reminder that if you want to find your life, first you have to lose it. If you want to be exalted, first you have to be humbled. And so as we prioritize Jesus Christ and we prioritize others, there's this, I'm embarrassed to even mention the cliche because it's so corny, and yet most cliches are mentioned because they're so accurate, right? We got J for Jesus, O for others, and what comes last? The Y for yourself. And when you get Jesus, others, and yourself last, what do you spell? Joy. I'm sorry. But there is something true there, isn't there? There are so many people who pursue joy by putting themselves first. Maybe Jesus second, maybe others second, maybe neither. They mix and match, but it's always why first. And you cannot get joy when you start the word with why. You will not find joy in life. It's a paradox. It seems like you should. It seems like if I live to make myself happy, and I live to eat good food and have good times for pleasure and comfort and safety and security, I will have more joy than someone who lives for Jesus first and others second. But it's not true. Look at Hollywood, the happiest place on earth, where everybody is just peaceful and content with their lives. It doesn't work to live for yourself. It doesn't make you happy. It doesn't give you joy. There's a paradox that God has built into us, that we rejoice most when we turn life upside down. When we live for Jesus Christ and we sacrifice ourselves as a drink offering, there's something fulfilling about it. There's something rewarding about it. And we actually experience what so many people are living their lives to experience. Would you pray with me?